All right, welcome to UPod to Win the Game. I am Charles Robinson here with Jori Epstein and Charles McDonald. Have some news, some good news, some bad news. This will
Don't
be
we always have news? Isn't this a news show?
Yeah. We have some news about this show. This is going to be the last episode of UPod to Win the Game. That is kind of the bad news, but not entirely what you might think. We're doing some shuffling with the podcast network here at Yahoo Sports, and the name essentially of the show is going to change, and maybe a little bit of the format. Jori and I are going to continue on with this show. You'll find it in the same place. All you'll see is the name change, the art change, but UPod to Win the Game is going away, and Jori and I are going to end up doing more of sort of a newsy take on what we're hearing each week. And just so you know, the name of the new show is going to be called Inside Coverage. So don't stop tuning in. You're just going to look and go, wait, why isn't it called UPod to Win the Game anymore? It's just we brought in an infusion of new talent. We're going to have different people doing different shows. I want to give a shout out, obviously, to Therese Paylor, because really the UPod to Win the Game was a Second Life iteration of the Yahoo Sports NFL podcast. The reviews that we have, a lot of our foundations, so many of the episodes were obviously built on what Therese and I started years ago. And then C-Mac and Jori and I continued on heading toward at least the 2023 season. So it's okay. Change is good. I also will not be on the Sunday Night Freestyle anymore. It's going to free me up to solely focus my Sundays on writing and making phone calls and sending out text messages and stuff, which is going to be good for me. Definitely changes afoot. Okay, so people understand what's going to happen with the network. We're relaunching. The overall network is going to be called Zero Blitz. That will also be its own show on Thursday. And Jason Fitz, you might know him from radio. ESPN has joined Yahoo Sports. He's going to be hosting some of these shows. He's going to be, basically hosting with a number of us. Jori and I are going to have Jason Fitz is going to be doing our show Inside Coverage. But this all starts next Friday. There's going to be 4 episodes per week throughout the season in terms of the overall podcast network. It's going to have a number of different analysts and new formats. Jason and Frank Schwab are going to be giving instant analysis on every weekend slate on Sunday nights with the Sunday Night Blitz. That used to be the Freestyle, now called the Sunday Night Blitz. Charles McDonald of Four Verts fame is relaunching his podcast, The Exempt List. I'm going to let Charles talk to you about that. Starts in 2 weeks, but it's going to come out every Tuesday afternoon. And Charles, we will get to you in a second on that. As I said, Jori and Jason and I will be coming on every Wednesday on Inside Coverage, where we're going to talk about news nuggets and just sort of the behind the scenes of what's going on in the league. And then Thursday, Jason is going to be joined by a rotating cast of guests to play games, compete in drafts, do trivia, and basically set up the weekend's NFL action. And again, that Thursday show is also going to be called Zero Blitz. So yeah, we're excited about it. It's a lot of new content, but basically the underlying theme here is that the podcast network regarding the NFL is going to get a lot bigger, broader, and it's going to go into some different places, which I think is going to be really good. C-Mac, you're here now. You're going to be relaunching Exempt List. Just tell people a little bit about what they can expect on Tuesdays.
Other than your recap of our show, which you will be listening to religiously.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah, well, he might be going off of our show, but he's going to listen. So,
well, a Tuesday recap of a Wednesday show?
Correct. That's how much you love it.
I'm excited. I guess the way that I describe it to my friends is really just people in general. It's kind of like the football podcast if you love football but hate football culture. So we're here to do 2 things, to talk about the game and try to add context to what's going on in the field, and to walk the tightrope of what's like good to say and what will piss people off. So I think it's actually just going to be a lot of fun. I plan to have both Charles and Jori on. We're gonna have more guests on from sports media, football in general, and try to have some laughs while we learn about the game and have a fun season. So that's all I'm here for, just to laugh and have a good time.
Sorely needed, by the way. I think in terms of our NFL podcasts is, something that's not so structured and driven into the stats and the news element of it. Like there's far more there that can be personality driven. C-Mac, no spoiler alerts here, but C-Mac's already talked about some of the guests on the show. They sound, it's intriguing. So I think people definitely want to check out the new network. It's a pretty big thing for us to undergo this big of a change and addition. And I think it's going to be really good for us in the long run. Really, I think slots people in their best positions. I've told you guys before, I've never loved being a point guard. Terez was the point guard on our show. I love being a shooting guard. Set me up and let me shoot my shots. And I'm very, very happy to feel like that's a role that I'm going back to. Jori, you have anything to add?
I'm excited. I think it's going to be great. I think that one thing we're excited about is because we'll have so many different shows now, we can really sort of tailor them thematically. And I know that like C-Mac has this personality and this energy that is going to be so awesome for the Tuesday show. Really like take it over and unleash C-Mac. And then on Wednesdays, we'll really tell you like, look, Syrup and I are talking to a lot of people around the league and kind of keeping on the pulse, Syrup especially. So we want to let you guys know what we're hearing and give you another interpretation of what's going on that week based off what our sources are telling us. So tune in.
You don't have to go anywhere either. You know, if you're subscribed to Pod to Win the Game, you stay right here. It's going to change, but I think it's going to be fun. Like you said, everyone kind of gets to do their own thing, but we're still all connected. I'm sure we'll still be on all each other's shows. So I'm actually really excited for this. It'll be fun.
All right. We got to move on to finishing out this final episode. There is news, a lot of news, actually. A lot of things been going on over the last week. First and foremost, Jonathan Taylor not getting traded from Indianapolis, and just a really weird kind of situation that feels like it's unraveling, or we're seeing a lot of seams in that organization right now. Like, he's not traded, but the Colts put him on the PUP list, which is wild because he's going to end up missing the first 4 games of the season. So now there's this lingering question about, is Taylor really hurt? Is he holding in? Is he saying he's hurt, but he's not? At what point does this come to a head? And, you know, you could see at some point the Colts essentially attempt to suspend him for what they would view as a hold-in. I personally don't think he's going to play another snap for the Colts. I think they're going to figure out a way to trade him at some stage before the trade deadline, which I think is, I want to say October 31st this year. Please double check me on that, but I'm pretty sure it's October 31st. Everything about this feels so soured. And we found out that the teams, I think it's more than just these 2 teams. I think it's interesting that really it's only being reported as the Miami Dolphins, and interestingly, the Green Bay Packers had interest in acquiring him and had talks with the Colts. I think there are other teams that made calls. I don't know how far maybe those calls really went, but it has come out that the 2 most interested parties appeared to be Miami, which makes a lot of sense. They've checked on a lot of running backs this offseason. And then Green Bay, which is a little more interesting because you already have kind of a 2-back rotation between Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon there. That how would that have worked if you add Jonathan Taylor? Real quick before I swing this to you guys, I think the context for the Packers that's important here. The Packers are looking at Jordan Love. I think they feel pretty decent about where Jordan Love is right now in his development, that track. I think they look at the skill positions around Jordan Love and they go, wow, there's a lot of really young players here, particularly the ones he's throwing to. And I could see them wanting to add potentially another dominant veteran to the mix to kind of help smooth out that process a little bit. Again, a lot of talent around Jordan Love at the receiving positions and the tight end positions, but also a significant amount of youth and inexperience. So adding a player like Taylor, I think it makes some sense to me. I just don't know how they would have sorted out the running back position.
What's next for this Colts Jonathan Taylor situation? Do we just wait for week 5 and see if he's like actually healthy or fibbing? To me, it's kind of getting to a point where I don't know, if you're the Colts, how much longer do you want to deal with this? Because they've made a mess. Obviously, he's reacted to the way he's reacted, but you're here. And I don't, and like you said, how can he go back to playing another down for this team with everything that's happened? So I don't understand why they're holding on to him right now. I know that they were wanting like a 1st-round pick or picks equivalent to a 1st-round pick. Depending on what's out there, I don't know how much stock to put in like what was reportedly being asked for, but man, it just seems so messy, but it's a situation that they can't let go of either. I just don't know what to believe and what's supposed to come next.
I think you get to a point where if you're the Colts and you have an asset like Jonathan Taylor, you shouldn't just leave that asset for nothing. And in some ways, that's why him staying on the PUP list makes sense, because you don't want to risk not having that asset. And obviously, they should try and get as much as they want. Maybe teams will look for a different price as the season goes on and as the playoff picture clarifies. But you've just got to think that it's not in anyone's best interest for Jonathan Taylor to not play this entire season and the Colts to not get anything out of it. But I also think like the same reason that Green Bay wants Jonathan Taylor is the reason why Indianapolis should want Jonathan Taylor. So I'm intrigued. And I also think, like, going back to some of the reports with Miami and Jalen Waddle, that's why I'm always a little bit hesitant if they're not our direct reports to be like, hey, they're talking to so-and-so back last week when we were saying these things, because how serious are these conversations is always the question I think we need to ask.
The Colts definitely feel like they're being vilified in a situation where Taylor has actively taken a very significant role in creating this impasse, like particularly as it concerns him landing on the PUP list. And again, that's why part of the reason why I think he ended up going on that list, which I think people are curious about. I don't think he was going to play. I think they know that he was just straight up saying, look, I'm hurt. I'm not going to play. So it is what it is. Figure out what you're going to do with me, but you're not going to see me on the field. I don't know what's true and what's not. I don't think any of us really know what's true and what's not, because it's going to look really fishy if all of a sudden he's, dealt and wow, he's healthy. Obviously, you have to get to week 5 before he can be dealt at this stage. But if he comes off the list and he gets dealt and he's healthy, it's not going to look great. It's going to look like a hold-in. And we see a lot of hold-ins happen, and that's it's unfortunate that's gone this way. We've talked about Jim Irsay, the owner, creating the problems here. At the same time, the suitors are the suitors, and they couldn't get it done with Green Bay. They couldn't get it done with the Dolphins. And if reports are true, especially about asking for Jalen Waddle to be included and more to be included in that trade for Taylor, that's a big ask. Like, that's a significant, you're looking for, Waddle is a high impact number 2 receiver in the league. And then when you ask for assets on top of that, you're treating Taylor like, honestly, I kind of think you're treating Taylor like McCaffrey was treated at the trade deadline last year, which is you think you can get a lot of assets out of him. And maybe you think, hey, if we can't get this out of the Dolphins now, or whatever we want to extract from the Packers at the trade deadline, there's going to be 1 or 2 teams that were interested, maybe the Dolphins. And now this becomes your cherry on top in terms of that push for the Super Bowl. So maybe that's.
So, Rob, if you were a betting man, what do you think a likely trade offer late October could look like for Jonathan Taylor? Be it picks, players, mix.
I think it becomes harder, in terms of players once you get into October, because let's just take it from the Miami Dolphins standpoint. At that stage, Waddle should, if he's healthy, should have put a lot into this season. And now you're going to take away that player from your quarterback mid-season. Like, I don't think you want to take a high level asset like a wide receiver away from Tua that late, in the season. I think it makes it much more difficult. I'm not saying it's impossible. This doesn't feel like baseball where, you're getting players who, of that level, that caliber, who are part of the team, by the way, who want to stay, want to be part of the long-term plan. Remember that McCaffrey was dealt from the Panthers. It was like, this is a rebuild. Like, they don't want to carry this contract anymore. Totally different scenario. The Dolphins, Waddle's a player they want. That's part of the reason why that trade didn't happen. So to me, I think it would have to be picks. I think at that stage, the Colts are just going to say, we need first round value out of him. So whether that's someone feels like, hey, we're going to have a late first round pick, let's go ahead and kick this in, or we're going to have multiple picks beyond the first round, a second, a third, or whatever, then maybe that changes. And maybe it gives the Colts a little bit of leverage too. If you have, let's say there's 1 or 2 suitors, let's say there's more than 1 suitor at the trade deadline that's sitting there going, we got a real shot here. Like, we really could make this happen. this is the player that like the 49ers looked at McCaffrey. This is the player that can make this Super Bowl happen for us this year and maybe beyond. We'll have a window of a couple of years, whether that would be Buffalo or, whoever at that stage, Miami. Like, let's see how these backfields shake out by that deadline. Maybe there's an injury that occurs with a high level team. Maybe, again, I'm not looking at the cap situation here, but let's say like Dallas. Like, what if Tony Pollard, let's say Dallas starts like gangbusters. Things are going great. Tony Pollard suffers a season-ending injury, in mid-October. If you're Dallas, you're just going to go, yeah, we're not going to look into Taylor at that point. No, because that, to me, that would dramatically change, what you could look like moving forward. So the time doesn't necessarily hurt the Colts in terms of potential suitors, especially if you only had two realistic teams at the table right now.
I have a question. I guess let's just assume for this theory that the trade request and demands were true, where they're asking for, arguably like a top 10 receiver who is on a cost control contract for 3 more years plus more picks. That's like it's so unreasonable. Do you think that they were doing it to also come back to Jonathan and say, well, we shopped you, no one wants you, so welcome back? Because obviously no one's going to say yes to a deal where you're asking for that much, considering where Jonathan Taylor is with his contract, where Jalen Waddle is with his contract, and just their statuses coming off the seasons that they just had. Is it just like so egregious that they were using it as a power play against Jonathan Taylor? Because that's the only thing that kind of makes sense to me.
No, I'm glad you brought that up because I included that in my story last week and reiterated it yesterday, which was that there were people in the league who thought that the Colts saw this as a win-win situation to either get assets or to show Jonathan Taylor that this is not us valuing you differently than what you think. It's the league valuing running backs differently than what you want. And that's why it was a little surprising to me that we didn't have resolution by yesterday, not because I thought they'd be able to get to that trade, but because it just seems from the outside, and we don't know what conversations are going on behind closed doors, but it doesn't feel like the Colts at this point are focusing their energies on getting Jonathan Taylor back on the field with them. And I don't know why that stopped being a part of the conversation, or at least stopped being a part of the narrative that we're hearing. And that if I were the Colts, I would want to be telling people, because this is still a really good player. And you should be trying to sell him at some point on, hey, here's how we'll feature you. If you can have this great year, maybe we give you some sort of I know it's not a franchise tag situation, but we saw with Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs that a couple million can help smooth things over temporarily. Maybe you do something like that and you at least get him in the building, and then he can also be putting on tape that will get him ready for next year. And it's just a little bit weird to me that doesn't seem to be the focus right now.
Don't you think, though, that's the focus? Because, I mean, if you have a player who's just like, I'm not playing, if he tells you he's not playing without something happening, and your requirement is for him to play football, what do you do in that situation? It's an either or. Either you pay him or you trade him. That's it. I feel like the either or has been created by Jonathan Taylor. Pay me or move me. One or the other. So you can't, what are you going to do? You're going to keep trying to appeal to something else? He doesn't want you to appeal to something else. He doesn't want you to say, here's how the league values you, which is kind of a you. I mean, that really is what that is. Let's be honest. That's what that tactic is. Hey, guess what? We're right. You're wrong. Come play for us. That's not,
right.
It might work. It doesn't create the most harmonious situation with a player, nor is it going to have a player go, I'm going to fight for this extra yard. Yeah, I'm going to take this hit. Yeah, okay, here comes somebody who came free up the middle. Let me go ahead and stick my face in this guy's chest so he doesn't kill the rookie. It's just bad. So I think it's devolved. I think Jim Irsay had a big hand in it. I do think Jonathan Taylor's had a hand in it. Everybody's sort of at fault at this point. They're going to have to figure out a way to sort this out. And, there's an agent in the middle that's got to do their work. It's a front office here and an owner that's got to do their work. And if they're going to trade him, now they have plenty of time, I guess, ultimately to think about it and see what else happens in the rest of the league. Trey Lance, I'm seeing pictures today of Trey Lance in his Dallas Cowboys number 15 uniform. Dirty. Go ahead and give him Will Greer's number. Man, I guess that's a way to go about it. The number 3 quarterback in the room now for the Dallas Cowboys. Cowboys acquired him for a 4th-round pick. Interesting. That is, I when I heard the comp, I'm like, wow, yeah, you gotta do that, because I don't think they were getting a 4th-round pick anywhere else in the league at that stage. Maybe a conditional 5th was what I was hearing, like as things were sort of coming to a head. So to be offered a 4th makes a lot of sense for the 49ers. It was interesting. John Lynch said that, Trey apologized. Oddly enough, Trey apologized to the team when they informed him he was being traded. I don't think the 49ers handled this particularly well. I don't think this is another one of those situations where I do think there's some shared responsibility here. But if you draft Trey and your commitment is to develop him, they went through a lot of hoops to stop that development. I think because they were trying to straddle the fence of feeling like, we have a great team here, we have a Super Bowl window here, he's not ready, so we're going to deal with Jimmy. And okay, now we put him in here, he's gotten hurt, we're going to lean back again on Jimmy. And then Brock shows what he shows, Brock Purdy. And, like the 49ers had plenty of dirt on their hands in terms of screwing up sort of where Trey Lance ultimately ended up. I do think the 49ers, there was an element of contrition when you sort of listened to them afterward, where they were like, yeah, we blew it. Like we screwed this up. I'm just surprised to hear him apologize to the team, man. Like that's sad, man. Yeah, that's a little bit. I mean, C-Mac, what does that tell you? Like just from a mental standpoint of a player, it's crushing to.
That's what I've been wondering this, the past week or so. Like, what is Trey Lance thinking right now? Because I mean, you have to be imagining that he's thinking of himself as a failure right now, right? And it's so crazy to me because people will be, well, he made money in San Francisco. Well, yeah, but he also didn't get to do the one thing that football players love to do most: play football. Like, maybe there's a world that he's just a bust regardless and just not good, and that is what it is. But for it to get to a point where he feels like he needs to go in front of a team and apologize after he got traded, to me, that also insinuates just like a level of lack of care for him as a person, if he feels like he needs to do that, like a lack of care for his career development. I think it's kind of wild that he could get to a point where he feels like he needs to do that when really all he did was break his leg and then not play well coming off a broken leg. That's not really worth an apology to an entire team. I don't know. That's kind of sad to me that he feels like he needs to do that.
Brock Purdy absolutely could be their franchise quarterback of the future and played very well last year. But does this feel like an early move to give up on Trey when you haven't seen that much of Purdy? Like, have you seen enough that you feel like he's your guy for the years moving forward?
He got beat out by Darnold, though. Here's the thing. I don't want to absolve Trey Lance of his play, okay? Like, we can talk about the process that got him to this point and why he was struggling playing. And I do think that deserves scrutiny. But the fact was, he wasn't playing well. He wasn't. I was there. I watched him. I watched him split first team reps with Sam Darnold. I didn't think either looked particularly good. But then as the preseason wore on and you saw both get significant reps, and you can argue about, well, second team, third team guys that are facing whatever. To me, Darnold looked more decisive. He looked more comfortable in the system. He threw, I think, some really good balls. I did see Trey Lance, I think it was against Denver. Right at the end of the Denver game, he had a nice little run where you're like, man, if he could just replicate this over and over. But I do think in totality, Trey Lance was still having issues of, if he couldn't find something immediately, it almost looked like there was an element of panic, in the pocket with him. Whereas you didn't necessarily see that with Darnold. That's troubling. Like, to me, that's not your backup at that stage. That's your third string quarterback, because he's got to learn to be comfortable. We all went to Jets practice. I think one of the best things about where Zach Wilson is as a player, he looks more comfortable. Like, is he having more fun playing football? Yeah, probably. But he doesn't look panicked as soon as something isn't necessarily working for him. And then on top of that, if he makes a mistake, he has shown the Jets a renewed or a new ability to not bury himself under that mistake, to bounce back. Malik Willis, another guy. You talk to the Titans, they'll tell you, you know what, he makes a mistake now. It doesn't end him. Like, he's okay. And by the way, he also looks comfortable in the pocket where he didn't a year ago. So to me, those are both things that I think really ultimately mattered in the Trey Lance equation. Probably we're going to keep him at the number 3 quarterback spot, and how he ends up with the Dallas Cowboys. So here's my question though with Dallas, Jori. I heard Jerry, Jerry came out, and when this all went down, one of the things he said was this wasn't about Dak. I don't like that statement. Drives me crazy because it is 100% about Dak because Dak's the starting quarterback. Okay. You can maybe say it's not directly about Dak, but you cannot say this does not affect the team or Dak. When it does, he now has to answer questions about how the former number 3 pick in the draft is now in the quarterback room at the expense, by the way, of Will Grier, who had a relationship with Dak, who was in a good supporting role with Dak, who was part of the culture of the quarterback room, which now changes. So, of course, it's about Dak. It affects Dak. Maybe not, this guy's going to come in and take Dak's job. That's not going to happen. Look, he couldn't beat out Sam Darnold. He sure as hell isn't going to beat out Dak Prescott on his best day in 2023. Maybe he factors in if there's a multitude of injuries, between Dak and Cooper Rush. Probably going to spend the season as the number 3 quarterback. But you cannot tell me as the owner GM, when you make an acquisition like this, and Mike McCarthy is asked, and what was an awkward exchange about how he weighed in on this. Did he know? Like, what was the conversation that happened with Jerry? And then also Dak was asked about, did he know about this? And it's you can't just completely wall off your starting quarterback, who, by the way, all gets focused through what? A contract extension. Dak's got a massive contract extension talk coming. And now you go out and you pick up a player who maybe you get some value out of that player, no doubt, but he needs reps. Those reps come at the expense of someone in that quarterback room. So even if they're off-season reps, you're still, trying to push reps to this guy you want to develop in the next 2 years. This idea, it's so disingenuous and intellectually dishonest for an owner GM like Jerry to be like, it's not about Dak. It is about Dak. It's instantly about Dak because you added an asset to your team. There's a reason why today I'm getting photos from DallasCowboys.com of Trey Lance throwing on the field in his number 15 jersey. Any other third string quarterback that you bring in, you're not getting photos on the team site about like, hey, look, Nathan Peterman's joined our team.
Right. I think I go back to what I often say about Jerry, the owner, versus Jerry, the GM, because the talent evaluation here, it's not close. As you said, Trey Lance didn't beat out Sam Darnold. He's not going to beat out Dak Prescott anytime soon. And by the way, the thing he needs most to improve are the reps that he's not going to get, because even if, God forbid, Dak gets hurt, Cooper Rush has shown that he's a very good backup who can and does win games. And this Cowboys roster as a whole has too high a caliber of talent and a contending level talent to just try Trey Lance and see what happens. He's not going to be able to get that level of catch-up he needs this season. And we'll see about next season. I mean, there's only so much practice time in the offseason guys really get these days with a lot of the new CBA rules. What I would say, though, is that Jerry felt like he was definitely sending a message when he goes, oh, yeah, and by the way, I didn't tell McCarthy or Dak that this was coming. It's like, even if that's true, which I don't know if it's true. It might be true. There could be did I not tell Mike we were considering it, or did I not call him when we agreed it was a 4th rather than a 5th and tell him the final terms before making the deal? Like, there's a lot of nuance that could be the case here. But regardless, Jerry does this thing where every once in a while he likes to remind you that he's the ultimate decision maker. And even if other people have power and are heavily involved in whether the Cowboys succeed, ultimately Jerry's going to do what Jerry wants to do. Which I will say, in recent years, Steven and Will McCoy and the front office have kind of kept Jerry at bay. And I'm trying to remember the last time I felt like they did something to this degree where Jerry was just so pushing that he was in charge and that he was going to do what he liked and get the headline out of it, whether or not it was in the best interest for the team. And there are definitely ways that this can be in the best interest for the team, whether that's that Trey Lance is eventually the Cowboys starting quarterback, eventually their backup quarterback, or that they can flip him for higher than the 4th round pick that they got for him. But in the short term, there is no sure bet that Trey is going to be that guy. And I just hear this voice of Jori wanting to be like, if this goes well, know that this was on me. Like, I was the one who made this call if it goes right.
No one thinks that Will Grier is going to develop into a person that could take over Dak Prescott or even Cooper Rush. But like with Trey Lance, you can look at it and say, damn, he was the third pick in the draft. He runs a 4.5. He can throw the ball 80 yards. That's the kind of stuff where if Dak does have a stretch of games, and Dak's prone to it, I think Dak's a great quarterback. But we've seen him play bad games and see how people react to it. Having Trey Lance on the roster, it doesn't help those things. And obviously trading a 4th round pick for him, it's not nothing, top of the day 3 of the draft. Usually I think in the 4th round,
Dak
you're still looking for guys.
was a 4th round pick.
Correct. Right. And you're looking for guys who can still contribute for you there in round 4. So it's not even like a nothing investment. It's just I'm just a little confused at how this ended up being the landing spot for Trey, because like you said, he needs to play. This is not a situation where he's going to play at all. And even in practice, you're getting to a spot where you're just going to start game planning for folks. Dak's going to take most of the reps that matter in practice because he's going to be playing the games on Sunday. So what does that really leave for Trey? I don't know. I thought it was just kind of a weird trade for Dallas, but I think, Jori, you gave a really good explanation as to what happened here.
Well, and also, C-Mac, you mentioned Trey Lance being the 3rd pick of the draft, and thus people have expectations about what he has the potential to become. C-Rob and I were talking this week about, it was a little strange that the Cowboys were so intent on floating that they had a 2nd round grade on Trey Lance. Yeah. Because at first when I heard this, I was like, oh, okay, they're trying to tell us, well, we just spent a 4th round pick on the rights and most of the rookie contract for a 2nd round pick. And then C-Rob's like, no, Jori, if they didn't tell us this, you'd think that we had a 1st round grade on him because that's where he went. And it wasn't just the 1st round. It was the top 3 pick. And I was like, oh, they totally got me on that one. And I'm glad. That's why I keep C-Rob around, to keep me honest.
How can you screw that up as a team, right? Like just let people assume that if it was the 3rd pick in the draft, you probably had a super high grade. And it looks even better. But instead, you're like, yeah, we had a 2nd round grade on him. We're like, well, that doesn't look that much better. Like, you went out and got a guy you had a 2nd round grade on, who now has burned through 2 years and been hurt and not accomplished anything that he was supposed to. I was just stupefied by that. I still at this point can't figure out why you would tell people if points for honesty, I guess, because if anything, we all deal with the draft. Everybody always tells you, oh, we had a 1st round grade on that guy. Oh, we got him in the 3rd and we had a 1st round grade. No, the Cowboys are like, oh yeah, y'all think we had a top 5 pick on? Like, no, he was a 2nd rounder on our board. Like, what the hell's going on? Maybe Jori was like, was that one of the times where our board leaked? God, maybe I can't lie about this. Did I hold? Yeah. Did I? So many of our draft boards are leaked. Maybe I can't lie about this. Like, did I hold the draft up in front of cameras this time? I can't remember. Maybe Jori's losing track of how often the board is leaked.
Like calling up Stephen and Will and be like, "You guys didn't let me get Johnny Manziel. We're stuck with Zach Martin. I'm getting Trey Lance."
What a crazy organization.
Weird trade, man. Weird trade.
It really is. And the crazy thing about this is it's not just weird to us. It's weird to everybody in the NFL. Like, I've talked to other people. Like, I'll paraphrase this, but I was talking to another GM, and he was like, the like wild thing about this is if you were able to get Trey to Dak production, you would be like, oh my God, we just this is the steal of the century. Like, this is the greatest thing we ever did. And yet no one really truly thinks he's not on that track. Like, it does not look like that's something that, is just a little bit further down the road. So if you pull that, and you have Dak now. So I guess the upside is if you get him to Dak's level, well, okay, but it took 2 years to get him to Dak's level, right? You're not going to do it right away. Well, now you still got to pay him. You got to franchise tag him to keep him. Like, I don't think they're not going to pick up his 5th year. There's no way they're picking up his 5th year.
There's no way.
No, there's no way. So no matter what, even if you got him to Dak level production in the next 2 years, you now got to pay him, which puts you in the same position you're in with Dak. Like, what is the whole thing is just, it's just kind of crazy how this has played out, and the lack of, like, I think people get the value. I think they get the idea of an asset that needs a fresh start. It's just this destination and sort of the cross section of everything that's going on in the Dallas franchise. And as you said, Jori, this team's too damn good right now to even think about how do we get, Trey Lance during the course of the 2023 season. How do we get development out of Trey Lance? Unless you're like, well, I'll be in the classroom. Like
you think Micah Parsons is going to go all out on Dan Quinn's defense if they're on the other side of the ball being like, oh yeah, we're going to put Trey in front of Dak and Cooper Rush?
What a great thing to bring up, Jori. Think of all the guys on that roster that love Dak, right? And by the way, some of which were close to Will Grier too, right? And now this guy's got Will Grier's number. It went down. It feels awkward the way the coach is addressing it. Feels awkward the way the quarterback addressed it, even though Dak did say, like, hey, we're going to welcome him. And Trey Lance was like, guy welcomed me. Like, it feels I'm, very upbeat about everything. The second anyone would even think of, and which is never going to happen, but if it did, there's no way those defensive players that love Dak aren't going to be like, all right.
I will say though, like, Dak is very good at, he is extremely internally motivated. He doesn't need external motivation, but we have seen different parts in his college career and his pro career when he just like turns it on. And I think that's the best thing that can come out of it. Not like in a overtly antagonistic way to Trey, but just like, okay, a little bit of an edge, a little bit of like, you see this guy who had a strong draft projection in the building, like, go show the Cowboys what you can really do.
All right, we're going to throw to our ad break. We'll get back to you on the other side. We're going to talk about a couple other news items that happened. All right, welcome back in. Josh Jacobs. I told you guys. I told you it was going to end up getting done. 1 year, $12 million, comes back slightly more than Saquon. The franchise tag was 10.1. So a solid bump. I think what's more interesting here is just where this would put another franchise tag, because now when you take the 120% bump for the next tag, now you're starting to get into that like near 14, you're right around the $14 million territory where you're like, okay, 13 to 14 million is a pretty good rate now for a top level running back. I think if most top level running backs, you pay them $14 million. I think that's kind of the going rate at the position for the top. They might, running backs might not be happy about that, but that's still a pretty solid number for running backs. This doesn't surprise me. Like when I went through the Raiders, there was no doubt in my mind they wanted him back. Like there was, when you talk to people in the building, they're like, we want to try and get something done here. We do envision a scenario where he's going to be our long-term running back, getting a long-term deal done. They just obviously were not close on the extension this year. So I think there's a chance he balls out and they still ultimately find a way to get something done with him. However, I will say this. I think if the Raiders tank, okay, I went through some camps where they asked me about Davante Adams. When they were like, you went through the Raiders, right? I'm like, yeah. They're like, what's going on with Davante Adams? Like, what are they going to do with that guy? I think teams, again, and I said this before, I think teams are looking at the Raiders saying, that team's got some assets. And if they start out rough, we're going to make calls. We're going to make calls on Jacobs. We're going to make calls on Davante Adams. I think if Chandler Jones just blows it out of the water early and there's a team sitting there going, well, if we can just get a run through a Super Bowl with Chandler Jones, we'll even make a call on that guy. This is going to help, though. They needed this. This is their, next to Adams. Now they have two elite offensive players with Jimmy, and it was just hard to envision them being successful without having every single ounce of talent on the field.
It's on one point, I feel like this team is pretty bad. Feel pretty confident that's a pretty bad team. But on the flip side, they do have like a pretty impressive collection of skill talent. I mean, Davante Adams, Hunter Renfrow, Jacoby Myers at wide receiver is probably about as good as a trio you'll find across the whole league, especially with Davante leading that. Josh Jacobs is back. We saw how good he was last year, and they invested in tight end in the draft. So, I'm interested just to see like how they get started off. They play Denver, Buffalo, Pittsburgh, the Chargers, Green Bay, New England to start the season before you start getting to the trade deadline. So that's a little bit of a tough stretch, but they also do seem to have the pieces if Jimmy G can stay upright to kind of, maybe fight for it. But then you start running into like Patrick Mahomes later in the season, and I think we've seen how that's turned out for them over the years. I'm just interested to see, like you said, if they do start falling apart, do you go for the move of trying to save your job if you're Josh McDaniels? Does the GM take over and start selling parts and saying, hey, we can get Caleb Williams and Drake May to kind of really jumpstart this rebuild? I don't know. They're kind of in no man's land, but they do actually have players that people should be trying to get their hands on if it's possible.
Right. One thing that keeping Josh Jacobs on a 1-year contract, even if you're paying him a couple million more than previously does, is it gives you a lot of flexibility with your future and with his trade ability, because another team is not having to agree to a bunch of years at a higher cost in the future. So there's that element, but then there's also the element that, like, I mean, you talk about earning power in any job and how whatever you negotiate for in a new job impacts your later earning power. I mean, the second franchise tag is 1.2 times the cost of the first. And I'm wondering, do you guys know, is he now eligible for 1.2 times the cost of the 12 million or still like the 10, whatever? Yeah. So no, it's still the first.
It's 120% of what your salary was the previous season.
Right. So to me, that's interesting of like, that is also going to, like, when you think about not just what it means for the Raiders, but what it means for the running back market as a whole, the average of the top 5 is going to be different because of what Saquon and Josh Jacobs did. Not significantly so, but it does make a difference for that second tag and for if the Cowboys want to tag Tony Pollard again. And I do think that starts to change the calculus of what the Raiders are considering with him next year, which might also impact whether or not they want to keep him through the year if a good offer comes in.
There's definitely still a lot at play here, but I do, I think the money being readjusted next year it's going to be interesting to see how it plays in the decisions of these teams, because they're putting themselves on a track. The Cowboys, the Giants, the Raiders are all putting themselves on a track where they have to make a decision about APY when it comes to these running backs. Here's what we just paid them. So that's just the baseline. The baseline now is going to be 13, 14, unless obviously there's poor performance. There's poor performance or injury that changes things. But if these guys all perform to the level that the teams are hoping they do, you can't deny the APY is basically starting at 14 next year. Like, you have to have a deal where it's going to average at least $14 million for these guys to ultimately get a deal done. So we'll see how it adjusts. Another little piece of news on Wednesday, Joe Burrow returned to practice for the Cincinnati Bengals. I think it's a big deal because it felt weird, the ambiguity from Zach Taylor when it came to, is this guy getting back in here? Like, what's the timetable? They really did not want to say the timetable. C-Mac, you and I talked about Jamar Chase saying, like, hey, you don't have to show up before week 5, like, which was just a weird number to throw out and made me wonder whether or not Jamar Chase knew this was a far worse injury than really what we were being told publicly. Burrow, though, returning back to action, I think it's great because, man, the AFC North, it is a horrible division to be in this year. I think every single one of those teams in the AFC North has a chance to be really, really good. And I think the most important thing is top to bottom, all the quarterbacks they're ready to go. And if Kenny Pickett has taken the step forward that I think he has, like when I went through with the Steelers and talked to them about Pickett, it is a horrible division to have to come out of this year. I don't know. You tell me who's going to finish 4th in the AFC North.
I don't know.
It's tough.
I don't know. And they start off right off the bat at Browns, and then they play the Ravens at home the next week. So you can't really afford to take L's in both of those games. So getting Joe Burrow back is huge. But who's going to finish 4th? That's a good question. I think I would probably still go with Cleveland. I don't know. I'm not. I feel like with Deshaun,
they have the most question marks.
Yeah, you got to do it, dude. I just want to see him play back up to the level that he was before. Before the Deshaun Watson became an incendiary name. Before, like, the basically player that they thought they were trading for last year. If he's not that, then they have really no chance of competing with the rest of the division. I'm a little concerned about the run defense too. They're small up front, outside of like they got line. They got Sion Takitaki, excuse me. He's going to play nose tackle for them. They got Dalvin Tomlinson. Myles Garrett's the world beater. They got Ogbo Ankaranko, who is, I think he's a good pass rusher, but at the end of the day, he's like 230, 235 pounds. If if this is still, to me, a situation where the Browns defense could get run off the field at certain situations. So I'm a little, not all the way in on the Browns, maybe like some other people are, but I mean, if this is your fourth team in a division, that's like a pretty, intensely competitive spot to be in. So the Bengals, they needed Joe Burrow for that, and it looks like he's back on track for week 1, which is a good thing for them.
Right. Like the Bengals to me still seem like the favorite and like the surest bet to have success. I feel like the Ravens and the Browns have a higher ceiling to me than the Steelers, but also a lower floor. And so it's sort of like, how does this stuff shake out? I mean, spoiler alert for our season predictions, but like when we had to put biggest disappointment for our season preview and what we're turning in today, like I think Odell could be that relative to the amount of money he's making. So I think that's something to keep an eye on. The other thing that I wonder though is, so I was there the last day Burrow practiced in full. So that was the first day of practice at training camp. I was in Cincinnati. The second day was when he had that injury the day after I left. And Burrow talked to us that day and he said like he's had ACL, MCL, appendicitis, all these different things that have slowed him from previous preseasons. But he was talking about how it's tough to say when he really felt healthy in previous years because, to quote him, once you get close to that first game, you kind of drown all that out and go figure out a way to play your best. So I'm not shocked he's coming back right now. I think this kind of makes sense of, unless this was something super serious, this seemed to be the plan of like save him from himself in the preseason, but then make sure he's ready to go for week 1 in a big year. My question is, I really thought that Joe Burrow was going to have an extension before week 1 and before that season opener. Do you guys still think that's even a possibility?
Yeah.
You think it's happening?
Yeah, I think it's possible for sure. I will be shocked if he takes the field in the regular season without a contract extension. I'll be shocked.
And I talked to a bunch of agents for the story I wrote who were like, we're not letting our guy get back on the practice field, much less the playing field, without a new deal. So if he's returning to practice today, I want to know, is that something we should be keeping an eye on for next week?
Yeah, I mean, I think between now and the season opener, there's no question that and by the way, like behind the scenes, Burrow wants to be back. Like I think he's very bothered by this. Like I think it really, I'm curious to hear what he says sort of moving forward, coming out of this. I think he's very bothered by the fact that he was out of the fold again. I think it's one of those things that has frustrated him. When something like that happens with a player who's like, I want to be out there. It's bothering me that I'm not out there. I depend on being at a highest possible level as a football player, and I need to be out there. You see, I don't want to say it's like a war with an agent and a player, but you do see some disagreement where you have an agent who's like, hey, I'm here to protect you from yourself. You can't go out there and expose yourself. I know you want to be out there, but we have to think about your financial best interests. You're going to have plenty of time to be a football player the rest of your life. Let's make sure we get the finances done. I think that's something, honestly, that, Justin Herbert, when Justin Herbert signed his max level deal, right, became the highest paid player in football. I wonder, like some of these guys, when they go to do that become the highest paid player in football, I don't think all those guys are like running headlong into that. Like, yeah, let's do that. I want to be the highest paid player in football. I think some of those guys end up there, but they're like, do I really want to be like, think about how they're going to be looked at by other players that need extensions or like, and it's, there's a reason why Burrow was like, hey, I see there are other people that need to do extensions. I think some of these quarterbacks do kind of think like Patrick Mahomes did when he did his deal, where they're like, I don't know if I necessarily have to be. If I get close, awesome, still a ton of money. And I'm also not walking around feeling like, looking at other guys who need to put food on their table and get their extensions thinking, well, geez, I squeezed every last drop out of this organization. So there's probably an interesting dynamic right now, I would say, between Burrow and his agent and, the organization and being on the field for practice. But I don't think, again, I would be stunned if the Bengals, and I think this would be the right thing, if the Bengals didn't do the right thing and make sure that they had that extension done by the time he gets on the field in the regular season.
Playing football is fun. I imagine Joe Burrow would like to get back to just operating with things as close to normal as they can be, you know?
None of these guys, maybe there's a few here and there. Most of these guys all just want to be out there playing, right? Like, it's
right.
Like the money stuff has to be done, but it bothers them to not be out on the field. So, all right, let's swing to cut down day as we wrap this one up. There have been some interesting cuts. The Houston Texans, they cut linebacker Christian Kirksey, which is interesting because the guy was a starter and a captain for that team. He's got some value. Like, someone's going to go get Christian Kirksey. That was one that definitely caught my eye. And then, to me, the Panthers waiving Matt Corral, just because this was a guy who was just a third-round pick in the organization. He's a quarterback. He's young. He's definitely going to get another shot somewhere in the league. Hopefully not in Dallas. So those were two that stuck out to me. Thought they were interesting. Some value there for sure for other teams. Any cuts that really raised your sort of antenna?
Yeah, for me, it was the Patriots cutting both of their backup quarterbacks. I get that Bailey Zappi, as it appears, is clearing waivers and will be back on the practice squad. But it's one thing if you do this when your quarterbacks are vested veterans and you can be like, we have this handshake deal. Like last year, the Cowboys did this. I think it was last year, maybe it was 2 years ago, where they didn't keep backup quarterbacks, but they knew they could get Cooper Rush and they agreed with Cooper Rush and Cooper Rush wasn't going anywhere. That was not the case in New England. And I just think it's a little bit of a bold move, even if you want to bring in Colt McCoy or someone from across the country, to just have zero backup quarterbacks. And I know I was joking to you guys yesterday, and I stand by it, that like last year Belichick deprived Mac Jones of an offensive coordinator, and this year he's like, you have no backups. Like, what are we going for next year? Like, you don't get to throw the ball either. Like, it's just one thing after another, and it's just some weird flexes.
The Colts, they cut Darius Rush, who was a 5th-round pick for them, play cornerback from South Carolina. I mean, he was the guy that was kind of seen as a draft steal at that point in the draft and had some moments in preseason, but it didn't end up making the team, which is pretty interesting when you look at the Colts cornerback room. Outside of Kenny Moore, it's probably like the worst cornerback situation in the entire league. They don't really have a whole lot of guys that have played before or have a whole lot of experience playing well. So yeah, I was a little confused that they ended up cutting a guy who fit like all the prototypical physical stuff that you want to see from your cornerbacks: long, tall, super duper athletic, played SEC football, had some flashes, but to let him go, and he was promptly claimed off waivers by the Chiefs. So we'll see how that turns out. I just thought that was a surprising move for them, given their cornerback room. But
the Cardinals cutting Colt McCoy, I think
that was kind of funny. It was funny. I don't know.
C-Mac liked it because his point was like, they just don't care at all.
Yeah.
They give zero,
not that they don't care, but like they're telling all of us. I mean, this is a rebuilding.
Okay, but fair enough. But I will tell you, when I went through Cardinals camp, they liked like Clayton Tune a lot. And I live here in Houston. I've watched Clayton Tune at Houston.
Syrup, drank the Kool-Aid.
No, I'm just telling you, I was surprised he went, I think he went in the 5th round. I thought that was late. I was surprised he went as late as he did in the draft. Got an arm. He's played in a pro style offense. I think he was, translate easily to the next level. When I went through, he had a really good, he looked good in practice. He's one of those guys where I was like, I'm like, he looks pretty decent. And then when I talked to the front office, I talked to coach, we're very happy with what we see from this guy. And we've seen growth over the course of camp. And I got the feeling when I left there, I was like, I think that guy could end up starting for them this season as they wait for the Kyler Murray injury to sort it out. I put it in the notebook. Okay. Now they did trade for Josh Dobbs.
There are receipts. You've had a lot of good receipts lately.
I do have receipts from that. That was before all this came out. Drew Petzig, obviously the offensive coordinator there, has ties to Josh Dobbs. Monty Austinfort, obviously, who was previously with the Titans, there's some ties to Josh Dobbs. So I could see Dobbs coming in and being more of a shake and bake starter than maybe other organizations, because you do have individuals there that are familiar with him, not familiar with the team. It's funny to me. I'm not against this at all. Like, I don't look, who the hell are the Cardinals? Like, I'm sorry, but straight up, like, who were they before this? Seriously, like, who the hell were they? They weren't this team. They've turned over. By the time I went through camp, I looked at their roster. I'm like, holy, they've already turned over like 60% of this roster already. Like, I'm looking at a camp roster where I'm like 60% of the team from last year is already gone. And when I went through, I heard stuff about Isaiah Simmons where it was like, yeah, this dude is, he didn't want to play linebacker for them. I guess now he's okay playing linebacker now that he's been dealt to the Giants. But I think just the mentality of what he was bringing to the field, I don't think they were happy with it. And I think they kind of felt like, look, he doesn't want to do for us what we would like him to do. Maybe fine, he goes to the Giants. Now you can argue about what they quote unquote, they sent him for a 7th round pick and what a bad trade. He's been available the entire offseason. He didn't just become available in the last week. The Cardinals were willing to trade him from the moment they didn't pick up his fifth year option. And you know what they got offered?
Yeah, that was another one you have receipts on, Zero. Zero put in his column that he thinks they would listen to trade offers before that happened.
Yeah. I mean, it was clear. And they had been listening over the course of the offseason. And there's nobody banging down their door for a guy where you're like, okay, maybe he's a more athletic and taller, Jabril Peppers. Like, what is he? Is he going to be a DB? Is he going to be a linebacker? What are we going to do with this guy? And then when we watch the tape, he's athletic. There's no question, but he doesn't look physical. He doesn't look like a guy in terms of like sticking your head in there and making the big hits or doing these. I think there were problems there. And they weren't going to sit there and resolve it. Maybe he needs a fresh start. Maybe he's great with New York. I hope he is. Darren Waller, another player who I hope he blows up. New York's made some really interesting moves this offseason, arguably won the offseason. But I don't care. Like that Cardinals team, like, blow it up.
Well, the reason why it's funny to me is like they're just shouting, "Don't watch us this year. Don't waste your damn Sundays on this." And I just find that like I wrote this week for 4 Verts. It's just a warning to Cardinals fans. You don't have to sit around and watch this. Like, what's the intrigue?
Okay, but then C-Mac, pat them on the back for doing the public a service, like just being like, "Hey,
I don't give a shit about
for
that.
not lying to us." They get the honesty award of the preseason.
Yeah, if you're gonna blow it up, make it obvious.
C-Mac, so you do mid-season awards. Why don't we have preseason awards for you?
Because I'm tired.
The worst liars, like the best liars.
Okay, well, so we let's just keep an eye on the Cardinals, okay? Because really, what the whole story here, everything that we're looking at is Murray, okay? It is like it's Kyler Murray.
Yeah.
Is he going to play this year?
Will there be anyone on his team to play with? If
I
he
wouldn't.
Does play?
Like,
I wouldn't play him either.
If I'm the Colts and I'm Kyler and you might trade this guy, I wouldn't screw with it. Don't put him on the field. I preserve it.
This roster.
Preserve his trade value. Like, I wouldn't at this stage. And frankly, I think honestly with the contract that he has, we know it's going to be Murray, right? That's going to be the thing that we watch all season. So they can blow up whatever they want at this stage. It's all going to come down to what are they ultimately going to do with Kyler and how many games do they win? And are they in position for the Caleb Williams sort of sweepstakes, which,
yeah.
Did you watch Caleb's first game?
That was awesome. I watched the whole game.
Yeah, you see that throw, the one throw where he's like backing up, he dropped the ball.
And that was crazy.
Oh my God.
Crazy.
He threw it like 50, 60 yards, like 50 yards, like after dropping it on the ground, picks it up, backing up, and just wings it. Unreal.
Crazy. Yeah, he's got unreal arm talent. I will say, last Cardinals point, hopefully for me for the entire season, if I had to pick one thing to be intrigued about, Clayton Tune, I think that's like semi-interesting, just 5th round rookie, getting the start, coming from an offense where like they always put up a ton of numbers, but their best quarterback, like especially from Dana, is like Case Keenum. So I want to see maybe if they can get a guy that establishes himself a little bit better. But that's all I got. Okay, also I have this take about the Cardinals. Paris Johnson looks like a supersized version of Kyler Murray.
Explain. Wait,
he looks like a supersized version of Kyler Murray.
You're saying he looks like Kyler? I've never really even thought about it. So he and Kyler look like
320 pounds.
So they look like they could be related, but he's just a big version.
Yes, a way bigger version.
Is this like because of their hair, because of their facial
It's the hair
expressions?
and the facial expression.
I did just come up with some pictures that look like
But he's got to be
Kyler
rocking the
with hair.
fro. He's got to be
Right,
rocking
I was going to say
fro.
the fro is like the top similarity I'm seeing so far.
Maybe I'm just off on this.
Glad this is how we're ending your pod to win the game. This is like we're just Just light it on fire. Let's go ahead and
listen to the exempt list.
Yeah, exactly. Take the tape, destroy the tape once we get it in. Take the sledgehammer. We're starting fresh.
I don't know. The real question is, will we still have a podcast to jump to after our producer Stone had to put up with this episode?
Yeah, I don't know. This is
Stone. What do you say for yourself?
Stone, yeah, chime in, Stone. We got to get your voice on the final episode of UPod to win the game.
Supporting actor.
We're at an hour 10, so let's just wrap.
Yeah, we're ready to wrap. We're moving on to some changes. I'm ready for it. I'm excited. I know C-Mac's excited. I know Jori's excited. I think this is a good thing that we're moving into. So again, listen to the lineup. A lot of new content for us. Be sure to check in with C-Mac on Tuesdays on Exempt List. Be sure to check in with Jori and I and Jason Fitz on Inside Coverage on Wednesdays. Definitely looking forward to this. And nothing changes. You can find myself on Twitter at Charles Robinson. You can find Jori at Jori Epstein. You can find C-Mac at 4Verts, and our ace podcast producer, Stone Rochelle, at SJ Rochelle. And as we always do, and we will continue to do on Jori and I's show on Wednesdays, we ask you to help us support one of the co-founders of this show, Therese Paler, by checking out breakingtea.com/Therese for the all juice tea or hoodies. Remember that those proceeds from the sale go to support the Therese Paler Scholarship at Howard University. You can contribute directly to that scholarship as well as the one in Therese's name at Missouri if you check out our podcast description. So please continue to do that. That is a trend that we will move forward with. And remember, it's fantasy football season. Check out the Yahoo Fantasy Football Show with our guy, Matt Harmon. Get ready for your draft season. It's getting close. Clock's ticking. You definitely want to check out their archive. A lot of great stuff there on fantasy drafts. Please leave us a 5-star review. Tell a friend. Help us grow the family. The family of podcasts has gotten a lot bigger. We would like to make the family of listeners exponentially bigger. So if you can do that, it really helps us. C-Mac and I will see you next week after Thursday Night Football. We are going to do a special little podcast after the season opener. So we'll see you after Thursday Night Football. Peace.